participants those people who joined our digital competencies course. I know that we have some others who are now in the webinar room, but so obviously for them it's not so important. But for those of you who are our DC course participants, this information is very important. Obviously, by now you are all aware that the face-to-face trainings that we had for the course are over. I really hope that you benefited from them and you enjoyed them. But the course and the process is not over yet. So I wanted to kind of warn everyone that there will be most likely 2 more webinars on content, and that will be organized by the trainers that you had for the face-to-face trainings, and those will be 45 webinars. One of them will be scheduled probably next week. We need to still clarify some issues with the trainers because next week is a very, very busy week for us as a project. But just for you to be aware, there will be 2 more webinars, one next week most likely, and another one the week after from the 17th of June. After these 2 webinars, that will be again around technical issues, so they will really be content related webinars. We will have a webinar where you will find out more about your final assignments, and I would really like to stress that we are expecting to receive final assignments from all of those organizations who attended our face-to-face trainings. So please take it seriously and do try to find the time in your schedule for this. I think the trainers were giving you some indications of how this final assignment will look like with the toolbox and all of that. You will get detailed information by email as well, so you don't have to worry about that for now. But be aware that the next steps for the course are 2 more webinars to come from the main trainers, an additional webinar on what you need to do for your final assignment, and it's really important that everyone attends that webinar so that you don't have any surprises, and then the submission of your final assignments. In addition to the submission of your final assignments, please remember that you are also supposed to send your communication plans to Irina, who was the trainer for Mod 2. I think about half of you have, but I would like to urge the other half to send the communication as well. You also, if you haven't taken the online course that we have, the intro course that we had for this, please finish it. So IT for CSOs, that's on our Moodle platform. Go through it. It will not take a lot of your time. It's very useful. The tests that you need to pass are quite easy, and you shouldn't worry too much about them. But please make sure that you do follow all these things. So you do take the course on IT for CSOs, you do send the communication plan to Irina, you attend the remaining webinars, and then you submit your final assignments before the deadline, which will probably be the end of June. But as I said, because we are still discussing with the main trainers, the deadlines for their webinars we will send all that information by email with very clear dates and deadlines for everyone to follow. So that was all from my side. If you have any, after you receive the email with all this information, if you have any additional concerns or you need additional information, you can contact Denise, and we will try to react as soon as possible. Okay, so as now I got this out of the way, Tin is starting to draw something. Okay, let's see a smiley face. Hi, Tin. I will pass on the floor to Tin for his presentation on working with tech partners. Hi there. Bye. Well, I'll be here, but I won't be speaking anymore.
Hi, everyone. I just found found out this tool lets you draw on things. That's very fun. I am happy to be back. For those who maybe weren't here last time, hello again. For those who were, and the other ones get the smiley face. My name is Tin, and I will be walking you through the webinar number 2 of our 2 webinars around how to work with tech partners. Also, big hello to the Russian-speaking room, and big applause to the Russian translator that are doing amazing work as usual. So the first webinar, for those who were there, we talked about how to find the right tech partner, and we were focusing mostly on how to make sure that we do the homework first before reaching out to the tech partners, so that we reduce as much as possible all the lost in translation moments. And you got a little bit of a homework, and I have seen that there's, I'm thinking most of you, I'm guessing all of you filled it in, and thank you so much for that. So before we move on, I wanted to ask you really quickly some feedback on the exercise. How did you feel filling in the Alidad step 1 and step 2? Any big questions that came out? Anything at all?
I think if you have not chosen use your microphone option, write your questions in the chat, yeah, or if there are questions from the Russian room, then we will need help with that.
Oh, Anna says it makes you think hardly. I hope it doesn't make you hardly think, because that would be the opposite. I'm glad it did. I hope it was a good exercise for that. Will I provide feedback on the homework specifically? In terms of grading the feedback, no. This exercise is mostly for you specifically, to have you think through your challenges and your issues. Dako says it was interesting. Glad to hear. What I can do is I have to go back and see how many we have, because I actually reached out to the person who was one of the lead designers on the project, and he is also very interested in seeing how it went for people. What we can do is him and I could sit down and write up a little bit of a kind of a feedback, if you want it, based on what we read there. Like a paragraph of like our reflections on how it went for you. Does that make sense? Yeah, okay. Anna said that will be very helpful. We will do that. We will be pretty honest and transparent. We won't pull our punches, just so you know, so that it actually is useful for you. Darko says it wasn't possible to save. We've had that problem with a couple of people, and I remember we put in touch somebody from the group directly with the developers of the system, so that they can figure out what was wrong. Yulia says it was not easy, but I did it. Good job. Okay, great. I also heard from a person that, I won't be sharing names and anything, but somebody said they were expecting this to be more of a kind of a system that helps you choose a tool, in the sense that you get a list of tools to choose from, but instead it was more a process to get you to understand what tool you need. And I was like, yep, that is spot on. That is exactly what the tool is for. And I'm sorry if I didn't explain it properly, but I hope that it was in the end useful, specifically in this process of thinking through things. Anything from the Russian room? I guess Russian room just loved it so much, they were speechless. Okay, well, thank you all for filling it in, and we will find some time and present some feedback based on what we read. Okay, let's start with today. So if we first did kind of the focus on what we need to do before we reach out to the tech partners. Let's now think about what does it mean to work with tech partners in a way that's as useful as possible and as productive as possible, especially in order to avoid, the lost in translation moments. So 4 steps to this webinar. It will be shorter than the other one. The first one is finding the product manager within you. The second one is a little bit about the different ways of working in technology. The third one is about the tools of the trade. What are the things that can help you do that? And then there's a reading list that is kind of, the big books necessary or, useful for this type of thinking. And just so you know, no homework this time. But if you want to go back to Alidad and have fun with it, please do, but nothing required for this. Okay, so a couple of things. First of all, I have to give massive credit to Lucy Chambers of the website tech2human.com. You'll have her links at the end of the presentation. She is a business analyst and a product manager, and she worked for a long time with the Open Knowledge Foundation and the School of Data. And she is amazing. Information I'm presenting here comes from her design of it and from her blog, tech2human.com, that has some really, really choice, interesting information. But we'll get to that later. Credit Lucy Chambers. This is her, by the way, her listening. Her ears are slightly smaller in real life. Then, really important, everything we will be talking about today, you probably not only have heard, but 80% of this. This was actually direct feedback that I got in working with the Croatian NGO Gong when they were planning to turn themselves into a more agile organization. When we did a 2-day course on, what you need to do, how to prepare for that, at some point, the director of Gong said, there must be a catch because I can understand at least 80% of what you're saying. This does not feel like, like unintelligible or to understand. And we laughed because we were like, yeah, that's kind of, it's not really that hard. It's just kind of knowing what is and what isn't part of this main focus is what's important. And also it's much simpler than it might seem. We will, you will see words, most of them, we will dig some differentiations, differences between those words. But in a nutshell, what I'm presenting here in this presentation are maybe 3 to 4 different concepts that if you have those well inside your brains, you're 90% of the work there. There can be a lot of additional complexity to this process added by, different organizations or different ways of thinking. Sometimes they're necessary, sometimes they're not. But in reality, this is already kind of it. So let's start. Step 1, the product manager within you. How many of you are familiar with the role of the product manager? Write something in the chat, like a +1 or a smiley face. Plus, minus. Is that more or less? More, okay. Okay, we have 2 people who know the concept, and I would assume we have a minus. But I would assume people have heard of, the concept of a project manager is pretty well known. A person who manages projects. So that is probably the first thing that we will be talking about. A product manager is about not the projects, but the product manager is the person who owns the product that you are working on. 1+ from the Russian room, that's great. What does that mean? It means if I'm working on, for example, an online platform of some sorts, and I have a group of developers outside that are working on it for me, the best, and honestly, in my experience, the only way to get the job done well is to have the one person who really feels ownership and has ownership of the tool, the product, this platform itself. A person who will sit between your organization, yourselves, and the developers, and kind of become the project lead of these two groups working on the same thing. 2, 3 groups, you can have more than 2 groups. So the concept of a product manager is, this translation layer between the developers and all the different stakeholders. One of the main goals here, the main kind of job requirements, is absorbing huge volumes of information, and then through absorbing that information, creating clear definitions of problems. Why clear definitions of problems? Because those clear definitions of problems are working on. The less a problem is well defined, the harder it is to create a solution to that, or in some cases, getting a solution that doesn't actually work for the problem. And this translation, and we go back to the lost in translation model from last time, that is the most important role for the product manager. From there, from the problem definitions, the product managers have to then take this role of understanding which parts of these problems can be solved by technology. Spoiler alert, it will never be all of them. And then the last part is defining acceptance criteria, which means defining some sort of a measure that says if this measure is satisfied, then the problem has been fixed, quote unquote. And you have this link, you will get the link in the PDF for more information around that. So let's talk about the difference between the product manager and the project manager. They are not the same at all. Ooh, some of my pictures got smushed together. I have been in situations where people thought, oh, product manager, project manager, potato, or tomato. I apologize for the Russian speaking room because this will not make sense at all. In English colloquialisms, when you have two things that are called differently but are actually the same thing, you say potato, or you say tomato. But in reality, with a product manager and a project manager, they are actually kind of, false friends. It's more potato-tomato situation, because a product manager focuses on what needs to be done and why it needs to be done. It looks at the problem definitions. It looks at the actual why of the building, while a project manager keeps track of what happens when and how it's going to be happening. Of course, the same person can be both the product manager and the project manager. You can have the same person, defining and designing what needs to be built and talking to the groups, and also, tracking the schedules and making sure things are on time and everybody has their information. If possible, obviously it's better to have two separate people, because both of these tasks are important and both are really heavy lifting. Is it like micro and macro management? I would say project manager is more about the old, classic style management. So both micro and macro, I would say, live more in the project manager part. The product manager is also sometimes known as the product owner, and we will touch upon that as well, in that it is, what's different is what they manage. The manager of the product manages the successful creation of the product itself. So it's more focused on ensuring that, we are building towards our challenges, while the project manager is more about ensuring that, the staff, the resources are moving where they need to be moving, if that makes sense. Potato, tomato. So now, product manager and product owner, in the spheres, many times people call product managers product owners, or product owners product managers. They're kind of two ways of saying more or less the same thing. It's not really completely the same thing. And we are looking at a PDF, so this does not make any sense at all. So I will be linking you with the actual GIF online. Absolutely content, but it's a fun GIF. They're same, but different, but still kind of same. Let's say, in a nutshell, the difference is that the product owner, let's imagine this. Let's imagine that we have enough people to have a product owner and a product manager. The product owner would protect the vision of the product. They're kind of the internal client, like this is what I want to build. While the manager is there to translate that into practical, doable goals, which sometimes means having to make hard choices. Like, I understand that you want to achieve whatever with your product, but it's either physically impossible or we don't have enough money or we need to prioritize somehow. So let's say, the product owner is kind of the internal client and the product manager sometimes represents the developers and the service providers. They can be the same person, and often they are the same person, but they are kind of two very different hats to wear. So you are personally in charge of a product development. It's good to think of yourself as having these two roles and kind of having this internal conversation between these two roles. What do I, as a product owner, want this to be? What's my aspiration? And then on the other hand, what do I, as a product manager, need to ensure that is actually doable? And what do I need to ask to the developers or to other service providers to make sure that we are doing something realistic? So before we move on, is this, how much sense did this make? Are there any big questions about the figure, the role of the product manager? Thank you, Monica. I'm sure it's quite clear for you. Okay, good. People are on board. I think for me, the most important thing about, making kind of the driving home the point of the product manager is that is the thing that the type of understanding of the role that I usually don't see in NGOs that I work with. I usually see NGOs not recognizing enough the importance of really owning having a person who owns a certain product that's being developed. There is usually not even the concept of product. It's somehow assumed that the product manager will come from the tech partner side. We tell them what we want to build and then they will build it. But that's almost never the case. The developers will build what you ask them to build, but their incentives aren't your incentives. Their incentives are to build something that works, that's efficient, that hits certain targets. They don't know those targets. They don't care about whether those targets are right or not. And they don't have the same audience in mind. You have your audience. The tech partner, usually their audience is the client, which means you. So that is why it's really important to understand, the concept of the product manager as living inside the organization and acts as the connection, the bridge with the developers, the tech partners. Okay. So ways of working. You have definitely heard about of these already. Oh, this PDF export really did not well, guys? But it makes the point. There are three kind of concepts that run around. There's lean management, lean product development, and so on. There's agile product development, and there's waterfall, the waterfall of it. Are you familiar with these terms? Or how familiar are you with these terms from between 1 and 5? 1, never heard of them in this context. 5, I do it every day. Perfect. So these are kind of, well, let me remind you directly, you know, Agile and Waterfall, perfect. And let's see, this is how it works. So Agile and Waterfall are kind of the two extremes of the styles of product development. And this is the main difference. Waterfall focuses on having an upfront plan. Waterfall wants to have the full-on plan of what we want to achieve with the platform, which means, you know, Gantt charts, which means timelines. I know that today we are going to develop the database, and next week we are going to develop the login system, and after that we are going to develop the design, and then we will launch at date whatever, and then everything will be done by, you know, September 14th, and then we're done. A very clean and clear process of development. While Agile, on the other side, says we don't want to have an upfront plan because we cannot be sure now that what we want to build in 3-4 months will stay the same. We want to create a system where we are building a product while we are learning about whether what we are doing is good or not. So the main difference is, in a waterfall approach, you sit down with your tech developers, with the tech partners, you work for 3, 4, 6 months on a thing, and then you launch the thing, and then you cross your fingers, hoping that people will like it. Good question, Anna. That's the second. That's step 3. We'll get there. So that's the waterfall approach. On the Agile side, oh, sorry, for the Russian room, Anna said, how do these interact with Kanban and Scrum? And we will touch upon Kanban and Scrum later. So that was the waterfall approach, right? On the other side of the spectrum, we have the Agile approach that says, we want to build a certain thing, but we don't know whether our idea is good enough. So the way we are going to approach this is that we are going to be building our tools in short, manageable chunks, where each chunk, each period will give us something, some result, some prototype that we can test with our audiences, with our internal stakeholders, and see if we are doing well, and we can course correct and see if we can just continue with what we're doing, or see if that what we're doing just makes no sense and we should just kill it. There are many options. And obviously pros and cons on both sides, right? I mean, a waterfall is easier, faster. It requires less of your stakeholders, but it's also much, much more uncertain. An agile process is longer. It might not be. So here's the thing: it seems longer because you don't know when it's going to end. In reality, sometimes it's much, much shorter than a waterfall approach because you can learn very soon that what you're building has to change. So sometimes the insecurity, the unknowing of the agile approach helps you with actually building something that works instead of spending a lot of time and resources on something that, you know, nobody wants. On the other hand, though, agile also requires lots of testing. Lots of testing requires lots of time and commitment from your stakeholders. Your stakeholders, your audiences, your beta testers at some point might say, listen, can you please stop sending me half-baked prototypes every week? I just make something for me, I'm tired. So that is kind of the risk of burning out your audiences. So where does lean sit in all of this? Lean just means let's spend the least amount of money possible. Let's not invest a lot. Let's invest just as much as we have to prove a point, to figure something out. The concept of the MVP, the minimum viable product, comes from the lean thinking of let's find what is the least amount of features of service we need to provide in a small kind of test thingy that will some information back to know whether we are going in the right direction. Obviously, we want to spend the least amount of money. Okay, it's a big kind of overview. And of course, waterfall and agile are two kind of extremes of the same range. You can have a mostly agile process with specific waterfall sprints for those things that you really know everything about. You can have a waterfall process that is only for a certain period of time, and then you go back into agile, and then you go back into waterfall. It all depends. Why is this important? It's most important because most tech partners will work on this spectrum somehow. And it's good to know what their approach is, because you want to know whether that approach is also what you want. And also, it is good for non-tech organizations to think about project management, product management in these terms as well. You know, in terms of, is it more important for me to have an upfront plan, or is it more important for me to be able to iterate and learn? Just keep in mind that they are two extremes of the same spectrum. You can't have both at the same time. Okay, speaking of Kanban and Scrum, if we focus into Agile a little bit, and you will notice that most of the kind of modern organizations want to focus on Agile work. It has been proven to work. We'll touch upon why and where waterfall works better. But in the meantime, if you're working on, you are not sure, if it's a new thing that you're building, Agile is the way to go. And so subdivisions of Agile. The two kind of usual approaches are called Scrum and Kanban. I see some people are familiar with these terms, and they sound weird, and they are weird. Scrum comes from rugby, and Kanban comes from Japan, from Toyota as a term. They're both agile methodologies. Basically the question is, okay, if we want to iterate and learn from what we're doing, how and when should we do that? So on the Scrum side, you basically have regular fixed sprints. You say, okay, in the next 2 weeks, we will try to achieve X, Y, Z, whatever we can achieve in those 2 weeks. And then after those 2 weeks, you look at what you did, and then you as the term goes, release it. You declare it's over. There are many different roles in a Scrum. You have the product owner, you have the Scrum Master who protects the Scrum process, you have the development team that actually does the work, and so on. We don't have to go too deep into all of these. But the change philosophy of Scrum is we commit to 2 weeks or 1 week, whatever our sprint is. We commit to it, we finish it, and then we evaluate at the end. On the other hand, Kanban says, let's just have a continuous flow. Let's, figure it out as we go. All people working kind of have a good enough feeling of what they can or cannot achieve in a certain time. Let's not, box them into some weird, non-existent time period. Why 2 weeks? Why not 3? Why not 1? Right? And so in Kanban, it's more about having a team that is capable of self-organize really, really well. Both systems work. Both systems are great. You will find organizations doing one or the other, or a mix of them. You will unfortunately find many organizations that say that they're doing it, but they are not really. Scrum doing it well is actually really hard. Once it starts, it's great, but it's actually really hard to get into it. But yeah, I will keep my cynicism down. So there's a good link on the Atlassian website about what Kanban does. So I personally love Agile. I think Agile is really, really good. Agile requires lots of discipline, because it can easily become, whatever, let's just build things and see where it goes. Nobody cares. We have to all the time. We don't have to commit to a timeline. Agile works best when you actually do have some sort of cycle where you explore, diverge, and then you conclude, converge. That's why Scrum is good, because it gives you these short-term deadlines and helps you work fast in these mini sprints. That being said, waterfall sometimes does make more sense. like, imagine if you want to build an online tool that is a very well-known online tool. It exists, people have been using it, the process is well understood. There's no real need for iteration. You just know you want to build this, then you just go with waterfall. It is sometimes dangerous to kind of think that Agile solves everything, while sometimes it's simply not necessary. And that call, the deciding whether to go waterfall or Agile, that's kind of what the product manager is there for. So let's talk about some tools of the trade for the product manager as a role. First of all, again, all these terms you've heard about them. I will give you the kind of the shortest, most concise nugget for them. The idea is that once you have these, once you understand these three tools, you are good to go. There are many other things you can add, but these are kind of enough for many things. So the first thing is the personas. How familiar are you with the concept of user personas? I think you had some webinars around that as well. Monica, correct me if I'm wrong.
Sorry, I was muted. Maybe actually Vladimir is better placed here to respond, because right now I don't remember, to be honest.
No worries. I'm just gonna give a quick overview of that. Basically, defining personas is important for one specific reason. You need to know who wants your product. Thanks, Patty. You need to know who wants it, right? And the biggest mistake, or the biggest problem that a platform might have, is if you define your persona, your user, as general public, or I don't know, youth, or civil servants. Why is that a problem? The problem is that general public isn't a persona. It is completely undefinable. Youth is a million different types of youth, or civil society, exactly. The problem with that is that type of audience specification doesn't help you understand what they need, because you don't know who to ask. You can ask a young person, they will have opinions. When you ask 70,000 young people, then you might get to a point to understand what youth does, but who's got that money and that time? So it's really important in the beginning to try to be as specific as possible about who our personas is. For example, instead of, civil servants, we can say civil servants, 20 to 40 years old, knowledge with computers and mobile phones, champions of change in their departments. That already starts giving you a better idea of who you are looking for. And also it gives you a better idea of who you are not looking for. You're not looking for civil servants age 65, working with a fax machine, waiting for the pension. That is all important. But also, there's the thing. If you Google user personas, you will find websites that tell you that the user persona should have a name of a person and a picture of the ideal individual, and should have their hobbies listed, and should have, the name of their cat, and so on. Not really. There's no need to go that specific. Sometimes it's useful in big organizations, they give names to their personas so they can quickly say, oh, we're working on this feature because that's for Jane. And everybody in the room knows that, Jane represents a person working in administration of a specific type of bank who likes to spend money on sports and has 2 kids, for example. But yeah, there's no need to overdo it. But it's really, really important to have a list of personas. We need to know who we are building this for, and also who we are not building this for. Whoever is not represented by the persona, it's a really good metric to understand whether we need a feature or not. For example, do we need a fax number on our website? Do our personas use faxes? No, so we don't, unless it's a legal requirement. Some countries, faxes are still very important. And also don't forget the internal personas. Who are your internal people who will be working on this? Your project managers, your director, your colleagues, they're all also personas. Your database administrators, they're all personas that need to be part of this. So that's step one, defining personas. Step two, writing stories. Who doesn't like a good story? Writing stories simply means, instead of saying, we need to build a login page, you want to explain who wants that login page for what benefit. User stories they're called, but sometimes they can be focused on a job instead of a user. So these are two different examples of how you can address this. As from a user-oriented perspective, as a user persona, I want to achieve a goal so that I get an expected benefit. Example, as a freelance investigator journalist, I want to know when certain information was last updated on your website so that I know if the information is still relevant. This type of information helps people understand why you want to build something and who is it relevant for. If we just say, update sticker on website, whoever is building it will be like, oh, okay, maybe I can just put, whatever. I can change the title from green to blue when it was updated because I don't know the use case. And then you have the job to be done perspective of the same thing, but you focus it from the perspective of a situation. When a content page is updated, I want to see it updated so that I know that information has changed. You can see that on the right, you don't know who the persona is behind it. And on the left, you don't know really specifically in which occasions do you need to show this. You can also mix them up together. But the concept of writing these stories is really important. And then the third piece, when you write a story, you want to have a definition of done. This is one of my favorite concepts of agile working and product management, the DOD. If I say I want to develop a last updated thingy through a story, then you say, okay, how do I know if it's been done? And you can think, well, if it works, it's done. But what does it works mean? You want to be able to measure that, right? So you want to design some sort of acceptance criteria. They can be really short and simple. That can help you understand when you think this is done. So update feature, one we were talking about in the last page, acceptance criteria. Number one, last updated date clearly visible on page. Number two, that date changes each time page content is updated. Once these two are satisfied, you're good, you're done, you're closed. You won't have to come back to her again. If this sounds like a lot of work for a tiny feature like an update date, it really isn't if you think about how many tiny things are required in a project that kind of tends to slip through the cracks just because there's no good way of measuring them or keeping track of them. Okay, I'm going to go slightly faster because we are 10 to 1, and we have some slots here to see. And last tool, you need a place to put all this. So where do you put your user stories? Where do you put the definitions of done? Where do you put your definitions of personas? How familiar are you with the tool called Trello? Yes, Anna. There you go. Anna knows about it. I'm guessing some other people might have heard of Trello, Trello.com. Trello is, I'm not advocating or endorsing Trello specifically. There are many tools that do similar things. A Trello is just basically an online board where you can make columns, call those columns whatever you want, and then put cards inside those columns. You can have a Trello, a Trello is a Kanban board, actually. It's officially called a Kanban board. You can have your Kanban board in your office on a wall. I do it usually whenever I'm working in an office with people. We do our Kanban on a flip chart on a wall. We have our Post-its and we move them around. And the idea of a place to put it all is that you can write your user stories in a card, you can assign that cards to people who need to work on it, and then you as a product manager can move it around the columns, and each column helps you understand where you are with that task, with that story. Is it in a to-do? Is it in work in progress? Is it in review? Is it in stock? This is a rhetorical question you don't have to answer. I realize that we are not in a room together. So I'm going to move on. So to capture it all, the tools of the trade of a product manager are knowing how to write stories, specifying definitions of done for those stories, and having a space to put it all. And that's kind of it. There are many other things we can do, but in reality, a good product manager wields these 4 tools really well, keeps them updated, constantly checks them, and that's all they do in terms of a day-to-day. And now we have the reading list. So before we go into the reading list, wow, we're actually great with time. Any big questions before we go into the reading list? Good. There's a no with a parentheses. If the Russian room has something to say, just interrupt me. Just to make sure we have time to go through it. Okay. Reading lists, aka books that I really care about and websites that I think are important. As we were talking at the beginning, tech2human.com, Lucy Chambers' website, a great starting point. Excellent resources and really good personal stories of her process, of her experience becoming a product manager in the Open Knowledge Foundations and then in School of Data. She did a series called 5 Years in 5 Blog Posts. That is, I think, a really good, it's an amazing reading for anybody working in our field. Well, that's one. Then there's a really good book on user research. So, the question is, we need to define our personas, user personas. How do we understand which personas are we working on? Well, user research is the key. Talking to Humans is a really good book on it, and it's free for nonprofits. If you request it, they just send you the free copy. It's in English. I don't know which translations exist of it, unfortunately. Then, Scrum is a methodology that actually has been invented by a person, Jeff Sutherland, who wrote The Art of Doing Twice the Work in Half the Time. He is the person who brought us the ATM machines because before he got called into banking, he was working on massive networks of, I think it was molecular biology. And before that, he was an Air Force pilot. So, the guy has credentials. Really easy book to read. It explains the why of the specifics of the Scrum process. And it's useful to have read it, even if you don't do Scrum. Because that way you can always be smarter than anybody else saying that they do Scrum. You can be like, I read the book. I know exactly what you're talking about. Then, this is a very nice one. Civicpatterns.org is a collection of short snippets of text from a bunch of people working in civic tech that pull out patterns of either behavior or intention from their past experiences. It is, you can spend like 30 minutes on it, reading through these, and they're really interesting and really insightful. It's a little bit old now, long in the tooth. It's been done 4 years ago, but in reality, the messages are as fresh as ever. Nothing really changed. Highly recommended. And that's it. With 4 minutes to spare, I will say my goodbyes, and well, I'm still here if anybody has any questions. But other than that, thank you for listening to me. I hope this was useful for you, and I'm sure the organizers will share the presentation with you, and I, while we talk, can share the Google Docs, the Google Sheets version with you as well. That way you can click on the link there directly, or have it for your own use if you want. Thank you for listening, and thank you, Russian Room. I hope you're there.
Thank you, Tim. Do we have any questions from the Russian Room, or?
Thank you, Patty. Thank you, Dago. Thank you, Yulia. Thanks, Anna. Thank you, Dimitri. Oh, now I started on it. Thank you, Dennis. Thank you, participants from the Russian Room. And I hope you all will have a really fun, sunny weekend in front of you.